Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the people and the clergy of the Episcopal Church of the Holy Communion, I welcome you to the latest installment of our annual speaker series, which is made possible through generous estate gifts from the Kesmar and Lancaster families. Holy Communion is a community of teachers and learners. We celebrate questions and we work together as we seek the truth. Our speaker series has hosted such notable guests as Walter Brueggemann, Anne Lamott, Phyllis Tickle, Ross Douthat, Elaine Pagel, and many others. Our guest this evening continues our tradition of pursuing an intellectually rigorous faith. Dr. Omid Safi is director of the Duke Islamic Studies Center and is widely published. His extensive study of the intersection of faith and culture makes him an important voice in this divided age. In his recent book, Memories of Muhammad, Safi articulates a goal that resonates deeply with us here at Church of the Holy Communion. He writes, "We strive in this volume to stop talking past one another and begin talking with one another." In that spirit of dialogue and mutual respect, please join me in welcoming Dr. Omid Safi.
You know, I was totally prepared and ready and psyched and excited until I heard the names of your previous speakers. And then I was like, sweet Jesus, what am I doing in such a noble company? Like, did your first 5 speakers turn you down? And then you were like, quick, we got to fill this vacancy. And I was available, so voila, here I am. And it is a joy and an honor to be with you and to have this time together. I make a point of attempting to start each and every, or at least as many as I can, of my public talks exactly the same way, which is with a plea and a prayer. And the prayer is that we leave this time that we have together kinder, gentler, and more intimately aware of the ways in which we're profoundly interconnected. One of the great gifts, the spiritual nuggets of wisdom of the Islamic tradition, is that the number of breaths that we get to take in our life is measured. It is finite, it is written in heaven, and no power on earth can add or subtract from them. And if you live with that awareness and you have a chance to be invited somewhere to talk with people, not at people, not to people, but with people, you realize that that's an ethical responsibility, right? We all have choices about where we could spend and where we could have spent this hour, but we've come together, and that's an hour from our finite number of breaths. So my hope is that when we leave it, that the spirit of love that we hope to talk about is something that moves you, that touches you, and inspires you to continue doing the beautiful work that you're already doing in a way that is even more aware of each other. Let me tell you why I'm particularly excited to talk about this subject. Because these days, a good number of the talks that I'm asked to give are about subjects that are hard but necessary. I am often asked to talk about anti-Muslim bigotry, anti-black racism, the attacks on the synagogues and the Jewish centers of our Jewish sisters and brothers, bigotry against our gay and lesbian sisters and brothers, and all of that is necessary. Tonight, we're going to talk about love. So let's talk about love. And I want us to have this chance to discuss love with an understanding. And by the way, can those of you in the back hear me well enough? Is that good? I don't need to shout anymore? Yeah, all right. It's with an understanding that when we speak about love in this tradition, we are not talking about our feelings. It includes that, but it comes from somewhere else. We're not talking about love as an emotion. We're not talking about love as something that we're going to celebrate one day out of the year, brought to you by the chocolates, flowers, and Hallmark industrial complex. We are speaking about love as what the Muslim mystics like Rumi, whom we're going to be talking about in just a little bit, are discussing, which is nothing short than the unleashing of God onto this realm. Love, they say, is not even a divine quality. This radical love, this overflowing love, this, if you're a jazz person, this love supreme. Coltrane in the house, right? This love supreme is the very being of God. That when it overflows, it brings creation into existence. It is love that brought you here. It is love that sustains you here. And it is this same love that's going to carry us back home. There is this river, this cosmic current of love that is the most divine force in all of creation. So when we're speaking about love, this isn't a hearts emoji, right? You don't look for it on your cell phone. This is a, how are we linked up to one another in a way that when I look at you, when I speak with you, when we speak with one another, we are acknowledging the presence of God in one another. Right? All of us know when you're holding scripture, when you're facing an altar, when you come up to receive communion, the spirit of tenderness, reverence, and respect that you come with. What would it be like for us to look at each other in the way that the Muslim sages talk about the human being is a greater temple for worshiping God than anything made out of clay and stone? And if we treat it that way, how would it change the way that we speak with one another? How would it change the way that we touch one another? And how would it change the way that our hearts cry out when we see our fellow human beings suffer? That kind of a love compels you, and it compels me, to be deeply and intimately concerned about the well-being of our fellow human beings. Because to see a human being being oppressed, to see a child go hungry, to see a person stripped of their dignity and their honor is a greater violation than to watch someone rip apart a Bible or a Quran. So this love changes the kind of community that we form. I want to spend the time talking about these extraordinary Muslim sages, their poetic, heartfelt teachings, but I also want us to remember that this is about building the beloved community. And you don't get to have the beloved community if you don't put love in the middle of it. That's all we want. We want to live in a community where we feel like the people that are around us relate to us in love. And that same love that compels you to love your baby, your parent, your partner, that same love is shared by people across the planet. Other people love their babies as much as I love my own. Nobody loves their babies more than I love my baby. I'm an idol worshiper who worships my babies. But I know that other people love their babies just as much. Not more, but nobody could, but just as much. Right? The people that we're going to be talking about, when they speak about love, it starts out with a relationship with God that goes beyond how most people, including most Muslims, conceive of these. So I'm going to tell you a story, because these people tell great stories. And the story is not made up by some California New Agey hippie. This is made by a sage of the Islamic tradition from 1,000 years ago, named Dhul-Nun al-Misri. And Dhul-Nun has a vision of the hereafter, of the day of judgment, and God collects together all the human beings who ever have been, who are, and ever shall be. And they hear the voice of God coming to them, to all of them, saying, "Who here wishes to be spared hellfire?" Right? 90% of the people just put up their hands, a little inquisitive about what this is all about. And they hear the voice of God come to them saying, "It is granted unto you." Everyone who raised their hand is spared hellfire. And they're like, "Cool." And they do their happy dance and they leave. And there's about 10% of the folks left, and they hear the voice of God coming to them a second time. P.S. Everything happens in threes in these stories, just to pace yourself. The second time they hear the voice of God come, and this time God says to them, "Who among you wishes to attain to my loftiest level of paradise, a garden that no sight has ever seen, and a pleasure that no heart has ever experienced?" Right? 90% of those who are left raise their hands. And again, they hear the voice of God come. And this time God says, "It is granted unto you. The highest level of paradise is yours." And they do the happy dance, and then they leave, and there's just 4 or 5 people left. And this time the voice of God comes to them thundering. "I offered you redemption from hellfire, you chose it not. I offered you the loftiest level of paradise, you chose it not. What are you here for?" And these handful of people lower their heads in humility, and they say, "We did not come here to be spared hellfire. We didn't even come to get into paradise. We came for you." And then they hear the voice of God coming to them, not thundering, but intimately, saying, "In that case, I am yours." These are the people that we are talking about. These are the lovers and the seekers who are in it for God, not even to be saved, not even to get into heaven. They are after God's own heart. And here's the amazing part. They are bold enough, audacious enough, and impatient enough to know that one can live like that here and now. You can live with the presence of God right here. That's where love comes in. All of us have had a little taste of the experience of heaven and hell. And if there is such a thing, purgatory. You want purgatory? Here it is. Imagine, hypothetical scenario, not that I've ever had a personal experience with this. You go up to somebody and you're like, I love you. This would be the part that you say. I'm so glad you said this because I've been feeling the same way. And there's just silence. There's not a yes, there's not a no. That's purgatory. Right there, right? The great Rumi has a wonderful passage where he's reading the Quran. And in the Quran, there's a lovely greeting that God has for the people as they're about to enter paradise. O soul at peace, you are pleased with God, God is pleased with you. So come on in, my devotees, and enter my garden. So enter, my devotees, and enter my garden. Now, most ordinary normal Muslims read that verse in Arabic as, y'all come on in, which is, وَادْخُلُوا فِي عَبَادِي, enter in, O my servants, O my devotees. That's how normal people read that verse. Mystics read the verse a little different, and it's perfectly plausible in terms of the rules of grammar. He reads the same scripture, but through the eyes of love, to mean, when you enter in my devotee, you have entered my garden. If you want to have a taste of heaven, have a child of God take you into their heart. Be embraced by someone who loves and serves God, and you have entered the garden. Perfectly acceptable reading of the Quran. It just depends on, it's like Bill Clinton, depends on what your definition of whatever is. It depends on what your definition of the word in. Is it enter in? Come on in, y'all? Or enter into my servants. And we also have a taste of hell in this world. Think about the last time, hopefully never, but maybe you can imagine this, that you had one of those drag out, kick out fights with somebody. I'm not talking about when somebody cuts you off in the road. These are usually the kind of fights that you have with somebody 1 degree of separation. Because as we all know, and as Brother Martin, that you all in your city has such an intimate relationship with him, there is no great disappointment when there's also not great love. Right? When you have that kind of fight with somebody and you're shouting at them, why do you shout? The mystics say you shout because they feel so far removed from you. You shout because they feel like their heart is so far away that you have to raise your voice just to reach them. What do you do when you're making love? You don't shout. You whisper. You baby talk. Maybe you don't even need to say a thing. You love glance. Because in that moment, you are so close that whispering is enough. But when you are angry at somebody, you have to raise your voice because they feel so far away, even if they're just standing 10 inches away from you. And then Rumi and these other sages tell you, think about your body and how you feel when you're so angry. How do you feel under your collar? What color does your face turn? You get hot under the collar. You get red. Some people's ears turn red. And they tell you what you are experiencing is a little taste of hellfire. Hell is not an oven. Hell is not a place with wood. Hell is a place filled with anger, with hatred, with that sense of being separated from who and what we are created to be. And that feeling of anger that you're sensing, that's just a little taste. So you can experience hell on earth. You can experience heaven on earth. These are the ones who want to be with God here and now. And then how do we treat each other? These are not just stories from the past. This is also living teachings that continue down to our own age. There's a friend of mine, a hippie in this case, 1960s dancer, nice Jewish girl, who's enchanted with Eastern style dancing. And if you're a hippie seeker in the 60s, where do you go to find God? India. Because clearly God is in India. God's not in Memphis. You got to go to India to find God and find yourself, because you are lost. So there were like tens of thousands of hippies who got on a plane and got on a boat, and they land in Istanbul, and they rent a car and drive around to get to India to find God. I went to India a little bit after the 60s, and I get there, and there's like this dude with dreadlocks covered head to toe in ash, and he comes up to me in the perfect Oxford accent, and he goes, "Have you found God yet?" I was like, oh my God, you're a white dude. I would have never guessed, covered in soot and ash. Have you found God yet? I was tempted to be like, why? Have you lost him? You know? But you don't do that. You don't do that to people. So this friend of mine, the Jewish hippie chick, in the late 1960s, goes to Istanbul, rents a car, drives around Iran, goes through Afghanistan, and runs out of money. So she's like, well, I didn't get to India. Let's hope God is also in Afghanistan. And she goes, she doesn't know the difference between a Muslim and a Hindu and a Buddhist. And she's like, do you have any yogis here? And they're like, well, we don't have yogis, but we got Sufis. She's like, do they talk about love? Yes, they talk about love. Close enough. Right? She asked where there is one in the town that she's in, and people say, well, you know, there's this large gathering, and there's a great Sufi there named Hashem, and if you go at such and such an hour, they have these sessions of poetry and music and meditation and prayer. She's like, that's just my thing. So the way she describes it, she says, I walked into this room, and around the edge of the room, I saw about 100 men, no women. All of them dressed head to toe in beautiful, elegant, traditional white Muslim robes. And here comes hippie chick, floral dress, off-shoulder tank top. One of these people is not quite like the other. And she says, I walked in, and 100 pair of eyes turned around and stared at me. And then she said there was one guy who was just beaming light, and he turns to me, and they always know what to say. They always have the best first lines. And this one said, "We have been waiting for you." They always say stuff like that. It's like another one of them, very similar experience, goes, "What took you so long?" Right? So she's like, "Oh, I was already kind of predisposed to liking him. We have been waiting for you." And he motioned to me to come and sit next to him. So she's like, I walked across the room with my bangles and jingles, and everything is making a noise, and everyone's sort of staring at me. And then the sheikh, the teacher, looks, doesn't even say a word, raises an eyebrow, and out comes the chai boy. So a little hint, chai just means tea. Don't go to Starbucks and order chai tea, because that's just ridiculous. You're ordering tea, which is just stupid. Like, you should order chai, or you should order tea, but you don't order tea, because it's like having fish, right? It doesn't work that way. So, raises an eyebrow, out comes the chai boy, big tray, 100 cups of beautiful Persian tea. And he goes around and everybody picks one. Now, this is the way that in these cultures things work. I understand things are a little different for us. They would take the sugar, because the worst thing in the world would be to have unsweetened tea. That's the devil's drink. Hell is where your tea is unsweetened. You take the sugar and you pour the spoon in the cup of the person next to you. And then you take the sugar and you give it to them. And they pour the sugar in the cup of the person next to them. And it goes all the way around and comes back to you. Why? Because astaghfirullah, I seek forgiveness from Allah for even imagining this, should the sugar run out. Let me be the one who has to drink the devil's tea. Let my tea be the one that's unsweetened. Let my friend have the sweet tea before me. So the tea goes all the way around, and it gets to her, and then her job is to put the sugar in the luminous teacher's tea. She says, 100 pairs of eyes are looking at me. I'm already self-conscious enough. I'm already nervous enough. And I go to pick up his tea and put the sugar in it, and my hands are shaking, and the teacup slipped from my hand, and the tea splatters all over this beautiful red carpet. And 100 Sufi wannabes, who clearly have not made it yet, they all go, slow motion. And she says, in that moment, I felt my heart close up because I was filled with dread and shame. I had come with such an open heart, but it was closed for being so exposed and vulnerable. She said, the teacher sitting next to me looked at me and smiled in the most gentle way possible, and without missing a beat, he grabs his cup of tea and flings it across the room so that the tea splatters everywhere. And all the people around the edge of the wall, they start laughing. And she says, I looked at him, and in that moment, I loved him. She said, I loved him because I knew that he would never allow harm to come to me willingly. She said, my heart that was like this opened up again. That's the beginning of the spiritual path. It's not about just reading a book. It's not about watching a YouTube clip. It's about how we relate to one another. How do we treat one another? the dignity, the respect, the love, the tenderness that we bring to each other. When you go into Rumi's shrine, this poem is inscribed there. Come, come, whoever you are. Wanderer, worshipper, lover of leaving. It doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you've broken your vow 100 times. Come, come again. Part of Rumi's invitation is you come to the path, not because you're perfect, not because you're golden, not because you're sinless. You come precisely because you need help. You come precisely because when you look in your heart, you know that your heart needs work. So you come to ripen, you come to sweeten in the company of others who are committed to this. And this is one place. Today it's in Turkey, Rumi Shrine, where every year more than 1 million people come. The dome goes back to the 13th century, roughly the same time as St. Francis and his legacy. When you stand in front of Rumi's tomb, the phrase that's written on the wall, Ya Hazrat Maulana, more or less translates as His Holiness, but the root of the word is a person that when you are with them, you feel the presence of God. These are people who are Godful people. That when you are with them, that God feels near and nearer. And at his time, Rumi's time, there were Muslims, there were Jews, there were Christians, Greeks, Armenians, Persians, Arabs, Turks, Kurds, all living in this town. Some were Muslim, most were not. And the stories that we have from him are filled with his interactions with people who are not, because that's who lives in the town. There's a Christian monk who lives in this city who has heard about Rumi's teaching and he loves them, so he comes to greet him. So he comes up, so imagine a dignified Muslim scholar and saint and meeting a dignified Christian monk. And the monk sees Rumi and he bows down in respect. And he stands up to go talk to him, and he sees that Rumi isn't bowing down to him. So the monk is like, oh. He goes back down. And then he raises his head to start talking, and he sees that Rumi is still bowing down to him, so he goes back down. The monk says, 33 times I lifted up my head to start talking, and 33 times I saw that he's still bowing down to me. So eventually he was like, I give up. Where do you learn this humility from? Rumi says, this is the way of my master, Muhammad. And the monk says, but I'm not even Muslim. And Rumi says, did my God not make you? Does he not love you? And does he not sustain you every day? If you carry the spirit of my God, how could I not bow in front of you? Right? There's another Christian who becomes a Sufi and converts to Islam and tries to learn the Muslims' language, which in this time was Persian, but it's kind of like any of us that have ever tried to learn another language. Learning language is hard. Like, English is my third language, and I still mess up periodically. My children love to call me on it. And I'm like, shut up, I've written 6 books in English. They're like, ha ha, but you still say Tuesday. It's not Tuesday, it's Tuesday. I'm like, they're both perfectly proper. Like, you say coupon. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with saying coupon. Anyway, there's one of these Greek Christian converts named Syrianus who loves Rumi, loves him so much. But like people that have had to learn a new language, he keeps using the wrong word. It's kind of like in Old English, when you had Lord such and such, Lord Shelley, Lord Byron, and then there's Lord of the whole world. He makes that same mistake. He keeps calling Rumi, instead of Lord Shelley, capital L Lord. And there's a Muslim judge in town, not particularly favorably disposed towards the mystics, who are like, you just called this feeble, mortal creature God. Repent now, or we're going to do some not very nice things to you. And Syrianus is like, I always do this. I always use the wrong word. I am so sorry. I didn't mean to call him God. So the judge is like, hold up. We don't have to burn the guy at the stake. We don't have to hang him. What did you mean to say, son? And Syrianus, I love Syrianus. We have lots of stories about him. He's like, I didn't mean to call him God. I meant to call him God Maker. And the judge is like, first we're going to hang your ass. Then we're going to crucify you upside down. Then we're going to burn you. And then we're going to spread you. Son, this is an old man, your teacher. He was born, he's going to die. First you call him God, now you call him God Maker. And Syrianus is like, I do this, I always use the wrong word. What I was trying to say is that he makes God real to me. He's a God maker because he makes God real to me. He says, before I met him, God was a word on a page. He was an idea in my head. I see his love, and I know that God must be real. I don't care if you're talking about a Christian sage, a Jewish sage, a Hindu sage, a Muslim sage. There's something about that divine presence that you feel when you're with them. If you're a Star Wars fan, they've got the Force. And you know it, you see it when you are in their company. The poetry of Rumi has started to become quite popular in America. By some accounts, it's the best-selling poetry that's sold in this country, largely through the translations of Coleman Barks. And people still come to Rumi's shrine for pilgrimage purposes. In English, we know the descendants of Rumi as the people who do the whirling dance, whirling dervishes. And it's kind of ironic that we tend to use whirling dervish as like someone who's going around doing frantic activity. It's actually the very opposite. If you want to think of it as a dance, as a series of bodily movements, it is graceful, it is slow, it's methodical. And it is what would happen if prayer became embodied. And the postures, the movements have meaning. And the quintessential meaning is this. When you see the whirlers, their right hand is turned towards heaven, and their left hand is pointing down towards the earth. And they are turning, keeping one foot on the ground, and the other one turns around them. The symbolism is dancing in rain. In a part of the world, a deserty part of the world, where rain is life-giving, where rain is always seen as God's mercy. What you're doing is, with one hand, you're collecting God's grace, you're allowing it to flow through you, and then you're releasing it onto creation. You are becoming a channel of God's grace. But if that divine love, that divine mercy, that divine tenderness is going to flow through you, you got to empty yourself. You got to remove the obstacles of the crud of your own heart. Otherwise, it can't flow. So each of us has got work to do on our own selves. That's one of the differences between this kind of spirituality and a commercialized, commodified one, where you go to your first session and the teacher is like, "You're a divine God." And the Sufis are like, The Sufis say, there is the Spirit of God in you, but it is covered up in muck. They oftentimes tell you a story like, there is an inner jewel, a beautiful diamond in you covered up in shit. And you have to wash it. You have to cleanse it. You have to purify it. What is the muck? What is the gunk? Ego, selfishness, greed, the mentality of me first. And they say we all have that. Each one of us is prone to this quality, and each one of us has to cleanse it. How do you clean it? With love, with service. So love is not something you feel, it is what you do. It is an act of service that you provide for somebody else. I sometimes remind myself, if you are sitting here, you are alive because somebody loved you more than they cared about their own rest. If you are alive, you cried out in the middle of the night, and somebody, usually your mama, who had not slept for 8 hours straight for years. We have a name for that. It's called torture. For years of your life, you sleep in 2 to 3 hour increments. Like, I will tell you all the secrets. I'll tell you where bin Laden was hiding. Like, just let me That's a funny joke. No. Okay, all right. Note to self, no more bin Laden jokes when talking about love in churches. All right. Like, just let me get a night's rest. Let me sleep for 6, 7 hours. You know when your kid starts sleeping for 6 hours, and you're like, it's better than sex. Like, you're not going to believe what I got last night. What? I got 6 hours of sleep. Solid, uninterrupted, glorious sleep. And you cry out, and that mom who has not slept for more than 2 hours for months and months and months hears your cry, the dad is snoring. And the mom has a choice. And she chooses to get up and put her breast or the bottle of milk in your mouth so that you can live. That's what love looks like in action. And you are alive because she put your need for food ahead of her own rest. Now, I'm a good dad, and I can't breastfeed, but I can change diapers. And I have changed thousands of diapers. And you go to your child, the great love of your life, and you open up their diaper. And there's a surprise waiting for you. And it smells like shit. Because it is shit. And you look at your baby and you love your child, but this is shit. And you make the choice that you love your child more than you resent their shit. That's why she's alive. Because you did that again and again and again. That's what cleansing yourself looks like. There are teachers, female and male. This is my teacher in Turkey. I've studied Rumi for 30 years. I thought I knew a little bit about him until I met her. And then I was like, yes, I'm just a little cup of water, and you are an ocean. Right? There is knowledge that comes out of people's hearts in a way that you don't find it in books. And this is how Rumi's poetry has been preserved through the centuries. It's written down very much like the Quran, an illuminated collection. It's a beautiful art form, usually done by women. And this is the first page of Rumi's poetry, which I love. It's in Arabic. And the first line, where you see that little red writing, right here. Right there. So it says, this is the book of the rhyming couplets, and it is, we're all Southerners, by choice or by God's grace, right? It is the root of religion. It's the root of the religion. And an editor, we know whose handwriting it is, it's Rumi's son, said, not good enough. So he grabs, like a teacher, his red pen, and he makes a mark. It's the root of the root of the root of religion. It's a tree metaphor. If religion is a tree, the tree needs roots. And those roots need their own roots. So think about this. What do the roots of a tree do? What is it? Bring in water. It brings in nutrient, right? And if you don't have it, then your tree will wither and it will die. What he's saying here is that there's a lot of ways of being religious that are not being nourished. And if your faith is not rooted, is not nourished, you'll have a dry kind of religion. You don't want that. You want to be moist. You want to have it give fruit, sweet, succulent fruit. You don't want to be a dry tree of faith. But the anchor does something else also. Wait, I think I said that. The root does something else. Guess what it is? Anchors, right? It anchors you. So here's one of the other differences. There's a kind, I'm going to use a strong word here, heresy, that many churches, temples, and mosques teach, not here, I know, called, because otherwise you wouldn't have invited me, called the gospel of prosperity. Come to this church and God will make you rich. Come to this church and you will be successful. Well, I'm sorry. If come to this church and you'll be rich, what do you think about the poor person right outside those walls? Are they cursed by God? No. This kind of a real spiritual orientation says, in life, sometimes you're going to be healthy and sometimes you're going to be sick. One of the hardest real talk things they tell you, think of everyone that you love. Either you will bury them or they will bury you. You're going to watch the people closest to you struggle with getting old, sickness, and disease. Do you have a kind of faith that can remain anchored at that time? Is your faith, if your faith has always been a kind of God will give me money and success, what happens when you lose your job? When you lose your home? When you get turned down from a job? If you think God will always give you health, what do you do when you get sick? So a real faith is going to tell you the same God that is the God of the mountaintop is going to be with you when you're in the valley of despair. Because in this life, we are not promised ease. We are not promised success. But we are promised that a faithful God is going to keep us company everywhere. Is your faith anchored? Is it nourishing you so you don't wither? And is it going to anchor you during the inevitable storms of life that are going to come? That's page 1. He offers you beautiful stories about how to practice this kind of wisdom and tenderness, not just towards others, but also towards your own self. One of my favorite stories from Rumi is one called The Guest House. The Guest House. And in it, he says, think about when you ask folks how they're doing, and they might answer you by saying, I'm fine, I'm good, I'm happy, I'm sad. I am good. I am sad. I am angry. I am angry at you. Rumi says, no. Your heart, this temple made in the image of God, is a guest house. It's a hotel. And your emotions are your guests. Welcome them like guests that are going to stay in the guest house for a few days, and then they're going to leave. Imagine how we would treat ourselves when sadness comes. Hello, sorrow. You are such a faithful friend. You come back to visit me long after a lot of my other guests have stopped coming. I am not going to fight you, and I'm not going to resist you. Come on in. You know exactly what corner of my heart you like to go to. Make yourself at home. I know you're only going to be here for a short while, and have a good journey when you leave. Imagine the grace that you treat your own guests, your own emotions that way. And anybody can say that to sorrow. Can you say that to joy? Hello, joy. Oh, I so do love when you visit. Come on in, joy. Make yourself at home in my heart. I know that you too will leave in a few days. Before we learn to treat one another with respect and love and dignity, we also have to learn to treat our own selves that way. Then we get away from this mentality of, I am happy, I am sad. I am the guest house, and these are my guests. He starts his whole book with a collection that talks about the flute, the haunting sound of the flute, because it reminds you that we've all come from somewhere else, and we're trying to get back there. And he tells you a story. He's gotten this from Greek sources, from Diogenes, of an old man who's walking through town with a lantern that is lit in broad daylight. Right? It's a weird, funny image. And people are like, what you looking for? And he says, as divodad malulam insanam arzust. I am sick and tired of these two-legged beasts and demons masquerading as human. I'm looking for one real human being. And people say, a real human. There ain't one of those to be found anywhere near here. And his answer is, I'm either going to find me one or I'm going to become one. Okay? So for these mystics, You are already human. You are made in the image of God, but you have to become what you already are. Being human is your origin, but it's also your journey. And I'm going to wrap up here pretty soon because I hear the bells. The journey is love. Radical love, supreme love. So the device in the middle doesn't make much sense to most of you, unless you're a medieval nerd. It's an astrolabe. And you're like, oh, an astrolabe. What the bleep is that? Right? An astrolabe is the medieval GPS. It's a device that Romans used, Arabs used, and the Muslims perfected. You would hold it up at night against the stars, the constellations of the stars, and it would tell you which way is north, which way is east, west, and south. It was a life-saving device that could help orient you. You would use the astrolabe, the GPS, when you're lost. I'm lost, I want to go home, but I don't know which way home is. It's like if you have a GPS device in your car, it always has the go home button. And Rumi says, love is the go home button. All of us are lost. All of us know that we've come from somewhere else, and we just want to go back home. But we don't even know which way's up and which way's down. His answer is love is the way home. If you want to find your way to God and to be truly human, you got to learn to love. He's, of course, not the first of these mystics and not the last of them, but he's a beautiful zenith. He tells you an amazing story of Layla and Majnun. If you grew up in the 60s and the 70s to the rock guitar of that god named Eric Clapton, that's where the Layla song comes from. Layla, right? I named my daughter Layla after that song. And the story of Layla that Rumi tells is this. There is this lover named Majnun who's gone crazy in love, writing these beautiful love songs for Layla and how beautiful she is. The king of the town hears these poems and he's like, I've got me to meet this girl. Any woman that would inspire such poetry would have to be a goddess. So he summons all the girls from the village to be brought to his court. And he's like, I'm going to walk in, and there's going to be like one of them that's going to stand out. And he walks in so excited to see this most beautiful woman, and he just sees a bunch of ordinary plain Janes, country bumpkins. All of them all right, none of them standing out. He's really puzzled. He's looking at the poems, looking at all these women, and he goes, is Layla here? And Layla steps forth, looking just as ordinary as all the other ones. And he looks at her and he goes, you are Layla? And Layla looks at him and she goes, I am Layla. You are not Majnun. And Rumi's response is, if you want to see the beauty of Layla, you have to learn to look through the eyes of Majnun. What the mystics do with that is to remind you that we got to learn to see the beauty in one another. We got to learn to see the presence of God in one another. What would it mean for us to train our eyes so that we only look at each other through the glance of compassion? What does it mean that we train our ear so that we only listen to what is beautiful and leave what is not? What do we do with this most devilish tool that we have that can speak the sweetest thing or the most sarcastic, biting one? And because I teach 18 to 25-year-olds, most of them women, a third of whom are sexually violated in college. The sense that I think about a lot is touch. What would it mean for us to learn to touch one another, a touch that would only bring comfort, is invited, and is comforting, but never clinging, never grasping. So this kind of a teaching has to change our bodies, has to change the way that we touch at each other, look at each other, and speak with each other. Let me stop in the interest of time and end it with the last story that we get in Rumi's masterpiece. Like a lot of his stories, this is built on a historical foundation, but he takes it and develops it. He takes it and makes it, he takes an awesome story and makes it awesomer. He Rumifies it. So the basis of the story is that in the old days, when people killed each other like civilized folk, before we just go bombing the heck out of one another, we would have a duel. I would send forth my bravest warrior, and you would send forth your bravest warrior, and the two of them would do hand-to-hand combat. And maybe my warrior wins, in which case your tribe is like, you know what, maybe we should just go home. There's been enough bloodshed for one day. So the pagan side sent forth their warrior, who's not even named in the story. He's just called a mountain of a man. Wonder why? Right. He walks in and he goes, "Who dares to fight me?" And the whole Muslim army takes a step back. Except for the young champion, Ali, Muhammad's cousin, his future son-in-law. Ali's like, "Oh, Messenger of God, I will fight him." And Muhammad is like, "Ali, you're a kid, you're a teenager. Sit down. Is there a man in the house today who wants to fight?" Crickets. And then the mountain man starts trash talking. He's like, "I thought that in your faith, if you die in battle, you're promised paradise. I tell you what, I'll make you get into paradise real quick." Muhammad is like, "You will either beat him or I promise you the garden. Who wants to go?" Silence. Right? Ali's like, "I will fight him." Muhammad is like, "Let me see if I can find a man." The third time around, the guy is like, "I'm getting impatient." Muhammad is like, "All right, fine, Ali, go. Have a nice death." So Ali goes. Up to this part, it's all historical. Then it becomes poetry. And Rumi says that Ali and this warrior have this hand-to-hand combat, and at some point, somehow, Ali picks up the mountain man, lifts him over his head, throws him to the ground, sits on his chest. This is his sword. He takes out his sword, and he's going to finish him. At this point, the mountain man, who's never lost a fight in his life, is so disgusted, not only at having lost, but at losing to a kid, to a teenager, that he spits on Ali's face. Like ultimate act of disrespect. And when he does that, Ali takes his sword, puts it back in his sheath, gets off of his chest, and starts walking around in a circle. And the mountain man goes, "What just happened? You had me beat. You had me on the ground. You had your sword out, and you got off of my chest." And Ali says, "I'll tell you a secret. You think you're the mountain man. I'm the real mountain here. When you spat on my face, I got angry. It's true. Up until that moment, everything that I did was for the sake of God. When you spat on me, I got angry. If I killed you now, I would be killing you for the sake of my own anger. Right? So notice, to become one of these luminous people, it doesn't mean that you no longer experience anger or lust or greed. It means that when you do, you can pause and say, I see you, but you will not move me to action. Ali says, I'm the real mountain, and a little gust of anger will not move me to action. And the warrior is like, this religion of yours sounds really great. How do I sign up? Right? It goes on for 20 more pages, back and forth mystical dialogue, and this is where we really are going to end. After the warrior says, I would like to really join your side so that my life can also have meaning and purpose, but tell me this, when you looked at me, I saw something in your eyes. What was that about? What's the real reason that you chose not to kill me? And Ali says, when I was sitting on your chest and I had my sword out, I looked into your eyes and I saw myself. In your eyes, I saw a reflection of me. Right? When you get real close to somebody, you can see yourself in somebody's eyes. And said, when I did that, then I thought to myself, how can Ali, this Ali, kill Ali? If I kill you, I have killed something of myself. It was for the sake of love in you that I could not kill a part of me. That is the promise of this path of love. Whether it is in a Jewish tradition, a Christian tradition, a Muslim tradition, it is a love that compels you to see the presence of God in one another. And when we do, when we have done the work on ourselves, when we've purified our heart, when we've purified our touch, our glance, our speaking, our listening, even the one that formerly we saw as the enemy can become someone that we see as a child of God. May it be that that is a possibility for us in this day and age, in this wounded day and age, and that we keep finding ways of bringing this love back into the public spaces. Thank you so much for the gift of your time. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your generosity. And thank you for letting me be your guest for a period of time. Thank you.
In the interest of time, I think I might just put one question